So now let's get into some of the pathologies. You can see what a normal ECG wave looks like. It has a normal P wave, it has a normal QRS complex, it has a T wave. These are all important electrical properties of the heart. If someone has a disorder called atrial fibrillation, the top portion of the heart is the atrium, and these two atrium will show up as the P wave. Therefore, if you have atrial fibrillation, you should see abnormalities with the P wave, and you can see that. Usually what happens is there's a lot of small, jittery, what looks like noise in front of the QRS complex. That is denoted as atrial fibrillation. A first-degree AV block is a block in where you have a normal P wave, but it takes too long to capture a QRS complex. And how do you know it's too long? It's greater than 0.2 seconds. That is a first-degree AV block. A second-degree AV block is more serious than a first. It means there are certain times when you have a P wave and you don't capture a QRS complex. Therefore, there's some block in the AV system that's preventing it from getting through. A first-degree AV block is just slowing down. The second-degree AV block involves some QRS complexes that are not captured from that P wave. The most serious is a third-degree AV block, and here you can see a number of P waves with no normal QRS complexes. If there are QRS complexes that are generated, they are generated etopically and therefore have a wide QRS complex. How do I know it's wide? It's greater than 0.1 seconds. That's where all those intervals become important. You have to be able to identify what the interval is and then know the normal numbers that are associated with it. PVCs can be seen quite often. These can happen if you have, again, a type 3 AV block, but you can also get PVCs to occur on a regular basis. And here you can see some PVCs that are occurring in a sequence. And if you have them occur fast, that can be a ventricular tachycardia. You notice that there is no isoelectric line. You don't see any P waves. All you have are these PVCs. Even more serious than ventricular tachycardia is ventricular fibrillation. So at least in ventricular tachycardia, you were getting contractions of the ventricles that was pushing out blood. In ventricular fibrillation, you have so many contractions happening, it's not pushing out enough blood per beat. And if you don't push out enough blood, it doesn't circulate to the tissues, and you end up having hypoxic tissues and actually could die in this condition unless you got put on a defibrillator and you receive shocks. And that is the best way to get out a ventricular fibrillation. There are a number of other ways to look at the ECG, and as you move through medicine, you'll just deepen your understanding of what an ECG is. I'll go through one other pathology with you, and this involves the STEMI myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack. And I go through it just because it is something that you all have heard about, are heart attacks, and be able to understand or to recognize someone who had a heart attack with an ECG is helpful. So you can notice the normal QRS complex where you have a P wave, a Q, R, and S, and then you have a T wave. This can change if you're exposed to severe ischemia induced by lack of blood flow to a certain area of the heart. What happens in ischemia is you have a decrease in membrane potential. What do I mean by a decrease in membrane potential? It's lower than normal. So if you have a lower than normal membrane potential, you start off on a lower level. You have a normal P wave, you might have a normal QRS complex, but then you don't return back to this low level of which you had because of this ischemic event. And so you end up being at a higher value for your ST segment, and then you have a normal T wave. This is called ST segment elevation, and one of the key reasons why ST elevation happens is because of a little bit of a trick on your eye, which looks like the ST segment is elevated, when actually it's the normal isoelectrical line that is before the P wave or after the T wave, which is suppressed because of ischemia, lack of oxygen to a certain portion of the heart. And so this is just a very classic way to look at or to find out that someone has a heart attack if they show up with an ST segment elevation.